sound of inversions. Because sometimes root position can get a little old. I'll let Matt and Jeremy explain.
It's a good day today, Matt. You know why?
Why is that, Jeremy?
Because today we're going to talk about inversions and figured bass.
Oh, yay.
So let's get started. If you're going to invert an interval, basically you're going to simply put the lower note above the higher note.
Right.
Or vice versa.
Right. You
Correct.
do that by raising the bottom note up an octave while keeping the top note the same. So the top note becomes the bottom note and the bottom note becomes the top note. And you're sort of flipping these notes around.
So a couple of things change when you do this. The number, for example, representing the interval. So, for example, if you're at a third, it's going to change to a sixth. We can get into why in a second.
Indeed.
And also the modifier, correct?
Right, and also the quality of that interval. So a minor interval, for example, a minor third. Yeah. If I take that bottom note and move it up an octave, is going to become a major interval. So that minor third becomes a major sixth.
Which is funny because you're still using the same two notes. In that case, what notes were you playing just then?
That was D and F.
So the first time you played a D in the bass and an F,
Yes.
major third.
Yep. And
Minor third.
Minor third. I'm just going to keep this F in the same place and move the D up an octave.
Cool. So we got the same notes, but it changed from a minor to a major.
Right, from a minor interval to a minor third to a major sixth. Because we're just sort of flipping it on itself. If you think of a minor third as a certain amount of distance, there's a certain number of half steps in that distance. The rest of the chromatic scale is the complement of that distance, and so we're sort of just inverting that.
Okay, so when you're inverting two notes,
Yes.
you're changing two things.
Yes.
You're changing the number of the interval, I guess.
Correct.
That represents the interval. So if it's a third, it might become a sixth.
Exactly.
And you're changing the quality.
Indeed. So with the quality, major intervals will invert to minor and vice versa. Diminished intervals will invert to augmented and vice versa. Perfect stays the same. So if I play a perfect fifth, so I'm going to play D as my lowest note and A as my highest, and just invert that so that I'm going from A my lowest and D is my highest. That is a perfect fifth becoming a perfect fourth. So the number will change, but the perfect quality stays the same.
Okay. And in which cases are the perfects?
That is the perfect octave, which will invert to a perfect unison. So if I'm just playing two C's and bring the bottom one up an octave, we're just playing one C. That will invert that way and remain perfect. Also, the perfect fourth to perfect fifth will invert and remain.
And
perfect.
vice versa.
And vice versa in both cases.
So why do we use inversions?
We use inversions for a lot of things. When we're talking about just inverting two notes like this, the intervals, the main thing that's important is to understand what's going on and understand the relationships between these two notes. And by extension, understand the relationships between the intervals that they make up. Bach, for example, would write lots of fugues in which he would write a melody, and then the next melody you heard would be every interval from the original melody inverted. So every minor third became a major sixth, and every major second became a minor seventh, or what have you, and then that would be the new melody you heard. And it's important to understand those types of relationships if you're going to make it through theory class.
Now, do you think that Bach was intentionally doing this?
Oh, heck yeah.
So I guess the question was he calculating? Was he like, okay, I got this melody here. I think I'm going to try all these inversions of the same melody. Or did he just kind of come up with it and that was just how it happened to be? I mean, did he get into all the math and science?
Yeah, I think in the case of Bach, I think he really, really did. I don't think you can just sort of randomly through chance have that kind of thing happen, you know?
Right,
Because I mean, Bach was the man. He would write canons, and he would have like the treble clef right side up at the start, and then the treble clef upside down at the very bottom of the score. Because the idea was you were supposed to turn it upside down, and that was the second line of like the 2-part counterpoint. So it was its own retrograde and its own palindrome. You know, that kind of thing doesn't just happen by sheer chance. I think in the case of Bach, we're definitely talking about somebody that sat down and said, you know what? And I think he even had to write a melody where that would work. You know, I think he even had to write, okay, I'm going to fiddle around with this melody until I get a melody that I can invert, and then have another good working melody that like fits with the counterpoint from the original melody. And yeah, Bach definitely knew what he was doing. So there are other things in theory that I think people were doing things because it sounded good. You know, and then we go back and go, I wonder why that sounded so good. Well, here's why. And then we present an analysis, right? Or a theoretical proposition. There's definitely times in music when that happened. You know, Bach is just not one of them.
Okay, that was my big question. And that's probably something I should know.
Nah.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute. Well, cool, man. Can you think of any, okay, for the students out there who might be trying to start to recognize inversions?
Sure.
Can you, and we'll get into chords in a second, but right now we're
Yeah.
just talking about intervals. Can you recommend any exercises or any ways of thinking that will help you to grasp the intervals a bit
I
better?
can. Okay, so practice always makes perfect. You can always just write 2 notes, identify that interval, and then invert it by raising the bottom note up an octave so that it crosses, and keeping the top note the same.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, we should point out that you can do that the other way. You can lower the top note an octave so it crosses the bottom note, and, you know, those 2 notes are the same. Do that, practice it, practice identifying both of those intervals. Remember that the major and minor invert to each other. So any minor interval, when you invert, you'll get a major interval. Diminished and augmented share the same relationship, you know, and that goes both ways. It's a vice versa thing. Perfect stays the same. Remember also that the number of any interval and its inversion will equal 9.
Ooh, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So thirds invert to sixes,
Okay.
which equal 9.
Right?
Unison, which we could think of as a 1,
Mhm.
right, will invert to an octave, 8, and will equal 9. Seconds invert to sevenths, which equals 9.
Nice.
Fourths invert to fifths, which, spoiler alert, equals 9.
Well, that's good, man. See, now people have a way to check their math.
Yeah, absolutely. Check your math. Make sure, you know, that should add up. You should have this, if you inverted an interval properly, you should have the same 2 notes that you started with. The one that was the highest note should now be the lowest note, and vice versa. Your your 2 numbers should add up to 9, and your qualities should have, you know, either change from major to minor, or from diminished to augmented, or stayed the same if it's perfect.
There's some ways that inversions have helped, you know, make music more interesting, or it can help your musicianship, you know. I mean, for example, if you'll say just play like an A minor root position chord. Well, there's your A minor chord. Now, if one musician's playing that chord and you don't want to do the exact same thing as they're doing, you can scoot it up. You can invert it. Oh, see, that has a little bit of same chord, but a bit of a different sound.
Exactly.
You know? It widens the texture. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm playing bass with a band, well, maybe I'll get bored with just doing the same root note. Say we're in the key of C and I'm just sitting there playing C over and over again. Maybe I'll move it up. Yeah, play me like a C. Yeah. Maybe I'll put the third in the bass. You know, so that helps to change my role. It helps to keep the music a little bit less predictable, a little more interesting.
Yeah, definitely more interesting bass line when you do things like that. Yeah.
Cool. I think we've covered intervals pretty good. Let's move into chords and how this works with figured bass.
Yeah, okay, so the big thing that we're adding when we start with triads, 3-note chords, is that now we have 3 notes which means we have three different intervals to play with. We have the interval from the root of the chord to the third of the chord. And then we have the interval from the third to the fifth. And then we have the interval from the fifth, up to the root again. Really. So we have three intervals that we can invert and play with. So if I take, and this is just good old C major. If I take that lowest note I played, that C, and I move it up this octave, what I have now is that I inverted this chord, and I now have the third of the chord E as my lowest sounding note. It's still the same chord, so this is what I started with. This is after I inverted a note by just taking one of those notes and moving it up an octave, just like we did with intervals. It just has a little bit of a different quality, and as you learn in theory, they can play sort of different types of roles from root position chords. We call this, with the third of the chord in the bass, we call this first inversion.
Okay.
Because we only inverted a single note. We moved a single note up an octave.
From its natural state.
From its natural state. Yeah, when we're just playing root, third, and fifth, this is called root position. And moving the root up an octave is called first inversion. If I move the root and the third up an octave, now the fifth is my lowest sounding note, and we call that second inversion. And those are our big options with triads, because to then move the fifth, we just have the whole chord up an octave again.
Right, so just to summarize, within a triad, there's three possible positions. We have the root position, and in the case of this C major chord we're playing, the lowest note you're hearing is the C note, or the root of that chord. In the first inversion, we have the next note up,
right,
or the E in this case, as the lowest sounding note.
Exactly.
Or the third of the chord.
Exactly. And then we have second inversion, where the fifth is the lowest sounding note.
And that's in the case of the triad. Now, if you want to put a seventh chord, if you want to have a seventh chord, we can keep on adding inversions, right?
Indeed, we get one more. So if I have a C7 chord, this is root position. With the C as the lowest sounding note, I'm going to do the same thing, pulling that C up an octave from here to here. And now we have a C7 chord in first inversion. And then we can do second inversion with the fifth in the chords as the lowest sounding note. And because we have a seventh chord, we now have this new possibility of third inversion, in which the seventh of the chord is in the bass. Yeah, so those are our possible inversions with triads and seven chords.
Here's the burning question.
All right.
How can we identify inversions? By listening, by ear training. And this might go back to what you were talking about earlier. But...
Yeah. How do we identify inversions by ear training? I listen for where the perfect fourth is.
Do you?
Yes. So if I play, sing those notes. So was the perfect fourth between the first two notes?
Nope.
Was the perfect fourth between the second two notes?
Yes.
Yes. So with that perfect fourth on the top, that is first inversion.
Okay.
Because what happened was the perfect fifth between C and G, right, in that chord, that perfect fifth became a perfect fourth because it was inverted. And so now our perfect fourth is on the top.
Ha-ha.
Yeah. If I were to play...
Okay, so the perfect fourth was just the two bass notes between the first note you played and the second note.
Between the first and second note, yeah.
So then that means that's actually a second inversion.
That is second inversion, yes.
Because the fifth was in the bass.
Right.
And that perfect fourth lay between the fifth and the root.
Exactly.
I think I'm starting to get it.
Last one.
That sounds to me like a root position.
It is. If you don't hear a perfect fourth, that's because you're hearing a perfect fifth.
Okay.
And that is a root position triad.
So maybe there's a slight bit more dissonance in the inversions compared to the root position.
Yeah, a little bit.
Because of that perfect
Because of that fourth.
Okay. That's cool. I never thought about that way. I guess, but in order to make that work, you had to get used to kind of hearing a block chord and kind of being able to sing the individual notes
That's the trick.
to yourself. And sometimes you have to do it in your head because if you're taking a hearing exam,
Yeah, that's
can have
another trick.
a low hum of students going,
And I've given ear training exams where you have that low hum. It is great. It sounds like a liggity piece. But yeah.
So it's actually kind of relaxing, or
It's kind of funny. And, sometimes you if it gets loud enough, you'll have to say, okay, guys, let's do our best to hum in our heads. And, they're not trying to be obnoxious, obviously. It's really hard to sing in your head.
they're trying to survive.
Yeah, they're trying to survive. But, you get good at singing, you kind of get good at singing those things in your head, and you get good at practicing those. You have to know your intervals. You have to be able to tell the difference between a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth, or you'll never, be able to do that. So oral skills is just like theory or anything else. You're constantly building on what you already know. The skills you acquire are vital to the skills you're trying to acquire.
Okay, so let's talk about figured bass. Let's talk about inversion symbols and how to identify them as they apply to your classes.
Right, because when you get into theory, the way you start thinking of inversions, we don't really even very often call them first inversion or second inversion. We will call them we will add their scale degree, their Roman numeral analysis to and their inversion, say like a 5/6 chord. Or a 1/6/4 moving to 5/7 or something like that.
And this drove me crazy at first. To me, I thought why are they throwing this seemingly unnecessary stuff to confuse me even more?
Unnecessary numerology, yeah, definitely. Well,
It is necessary.
to an extent, I suppose. It's definitely the way we do it, and having a way to do it is necessary.
Yes.
So, a little bit of a historical note. Back in the Baroque era, which was
1600 to 1750, somewhere
awesome.
in there.
Yeah. Actually, that's the exact years that we say at the beginning. Yeah, all right. So back around there was a time before all of this chord stuff had really been codified. So we didn't really talk about, that's that A minor chord. We talk about, there's A, C, and E that always kind of sound good together, so you see them together a lot. And when people were first started playing keyboard instruments, the keyboardist, who was considered part of the continuo, more about that in our Baroque history lesson, they would not spend the time and waste the precious ink to write out whole big parts for them. What they would do is just write the bass line, and then they would write the intervals above that bass line he was supposed to play. So he would have, for example, he would come to a place where there was an A in the bass line, and he would see under that A written 6 and 3. And what that meant was that he was supposed to, in whatever key they happened to be in, play a 6th above that bass and play a 3 above that bass, a 3rd. So we would, and they could play that in whatever position or octave or whatever that they were most comfortable playing it in, but they would know to play that, and sometimes they could even double that bass note or double one of those other notes, and that's what they would know how to play. And the symbols that we use for inversions are derived from that, because if you notice, if I have an A in the bass line and I play a 6th above it, assuming I'm in the key of A minor, for example, we're playing an F, and then if I play a 3 above it, assuming we're in the key of A minor, we're playing a 3. What I have made here is actually an F major chord, right? A, C, and F. But the 3rd of that chord is in the bass, just like with our first inversion. So I have an F in first inversion. So that's where this historical connection comes from. So when we get into theory, we use these symbols, which are called figured bass symbols, 6 and 3. that is our figured bass symbol that represents inversions. We just say 6 now. They got rid of the 3 because eventually it became pretty clear that if you had a 6, the 3 was sort of implied. So
that's
you don't
the
have
only
to
note
write
left.
3. Yeah, keyboardists were supposed to just know that. So we use a superscript 6 to mean first inversion. So 4/6 is a 4 chord in first inversion.
So have a Roman numeral 4 with a 6
Roman numeral 4 with a 6 as a
hovering to the
hovering
top,
at
to the top
yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's called a superscript.
Superscript 6, yeah.
Superscript 6. Yeah, 6/4 referred to second inversion because as they were asked to play a 6, if they were given a bass and they were asked to play a 6 above that bass and then asked to play a 4 above that bass, what we have is now, that same F major chord, but the C was in the bass this time. Because I played C, I played a 6 above that, which is A, and a 4th above that, which is F. So F major in second inversion, and that is a 6 and a 4. So we use 6. If we say 1/6/4, we mean one chord with a 6 and a 4 sort of lined up on top of, one on top of the other right beside it.
So a little ear training nugget for you. The NBC jingle.
The NBC jingle, yeah.
is a 6/4.
This is how we learned how to recognize a major 6. NBC.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We were also kind of teaching you how to recognize second inversion chords. Look at that.
See? Two birds.
Yeah, 2 birds, 1 stone. We're pretty sneaky that way.
We are.
Yeah. And that second inversion. And of course, if you don't see a figured bass, then assume root position. So no figured bass symbol, just a Roman numeral, that's root position. A little 6 superscript is first inversion, and a 6/4 is second inversion. And it is all about what chord tone is in the bass. Because, if we've studied theory, we know that this stuff can get pretty wild as far as what is going on, what chords are where. They're not all in this nice, comfortable little close position. Just remember that if the 3rd is the lowest sounding note, you are in first inversion. And if the 5th is the lowest sounding note, you are in second inversion. And if the root is the lowest sounding note, you are in root position.
And we need not confuse ourselves between the root and the bass.
Right, yeah. The root and the bass are 2 totally different things. Really, bass refers to a register. All the notes below middle C are in the bass clef. Mm-hmm. But for the sake of argument, yes, the bass note is the note that the bass voice is playing. Now, the bass voice, which is played by the bass guitar or sang by the bass singer, or is just, the left hand pinky note of the pianist or whatever you have, the bass voice can play the root of the chord or the 3rd of the chord or the 5th of the chord. And it is really that note that is determining your inversion.
Another thing about the figured bass, it's really not it's not like a script that you have to follow. It's more of like a roadmap or a suggestion, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a sort of a skeletal idea kind of thing. He could definitely add passing notes and ornaments and stuff like that if he wanted to.
Okay, so it kind of left a little bit of improv.
Left room for improvisation, definitely.
Killer.
So because we have a whole bunch of we have a whole other note to deal with when we talk about 7th chords and figured bass. If our Baroque keyboardist saw the word 7, he would just play, the 5 and the 3 would be implied. So, he would say, well, 7 means 7/5/3 to me. So I would play a 7th and a 5 and a 3rd above the bass, and there's my 7 chord. So in theory, a root position 7th chord has a superscript of a little 7 on top of it.
Okay.
So 5 superscript 7.
So Roman numeral 5 with the superscript 7 would be just a 5/7 chord.
Yeah.
In root position.
In root position, yeah. And just like with the triads, when we start to invert 7th chords, we get different intervals. So a first inversion 7th chord is what we call a 6/5 chord, because it creates a 6th and a 5th. Go play it and You'll see I'm right. I usually am, you know.
Of course.
A second inversion seventh chord with the fifth of the chord in the bass is going to have the intervals of a 4 and a third. So we're going to call those a 4/3. And with the seventh in the bass, you actually have that second from that up to the root of the chord, right? So that is going to have a 4 and a 2.
This is the third inversion?
This is third inversion. So if you see 3 Roman numeral 4/2, you know, that is a 3/7 chord in third inversion. Some things were sort of implied, like this 6 kind of became implied. So we said first inversion seventh chords were 6, 5, and 3, and then second inversions were 6, 4, and 3, and then third inversions were 6, 4, and 2. So, but because everything was a 6, we just stopped writing the 6 and just called it 4/3, 4/2. The way I like to remember it is this counting down from 7. So root position is 7, first inversion 6, 5, 7, 6, 5, and then second inversion 4/3, 7, 6, 5, 4/3, and then the only thing we have to remember about third inversion is to go back and add that to 4/2. So 7, 6, 5, 4/3, and then 4/2.
Got it.
Yeah. So just think of it as counting down from 7.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I think we're at a place where we can go ahead and do a quick recap.
Awesome. Inverting intervals. We take 2 notes, and we take the lowest note, move it up an octave so that it crosses above that other note, which we kept the same, and we get a different interval. We can also do that the other way. We can take the top note and move it down an octave so it crosses the note that stays the same. And what we get is a new interval, an interval that is an inversion of our first interval.
And when we do this, we change the number that represents the interval,
Right.
and the quality, that being major, minor, or augmented, diminished,
Right,
respectively.
Yeah, major intervals will invert to minor and vice versa. Diminished and augmented intervals will invert into each other, and perfect intervals stay the same. And then the numbers of the two intervals will always equal 9. So a perfect fifth inverted into a perfect fourth will 5 plus 4 is 9. Major seconds invert into minor sevens. 7 plus 2 is 9. Thirds invert into sixes. So that all equals 9.
Okay. Good ways to recognize intervals. Just get used to singing block chords in your head.
Yes.
And knowing where the root is.
Knowing where the root is, knowing how to sing that perfect fourth and where it is. For our triads, we consider our good old chord with the root as the lowest note to be in root position.
In the case of the C major chord,
right? Yeah.
C, E, G.
If the third is the lowest note, we call that first inversion, and we represent that with the figured bass symbol of a 6. If we're playing in second inversion, which the fifth of the chord is the lowest sounding note, we refer to that with a figured bass symbol of 6, 4. A 6 on top of a 4. With the seventh chords, good old root position 7 chord, we just have a superscript 7, just to say that that's a 7 chord. First inversion, the third of the chord is in the bass. If it's a 7th chord, we call that 6, 5. Second inversion, with the 5th in the bass, we call that 4, 3. And with the 7th inversion, because we have one more note, we have the possibility of one more inversion, that being the 7th being in the lowest sounding note. And we call that by the figured bass symbol 4, 2.
Cool. And the only thing I might add to that is be sure you don't confuse a 6th chord with a 6th chord.
Right, yeah, because a 6th chord is just a major triad with a 6 in it, with the interval of a 6th.
So in the case of a C major, you're playing a C, E, G with an A.
With an A.
It's the 6th note.
Yeah.
That would be represented by a C with the superscript 6. compared to a Roman numeral with the superscripts.
It would actually be, the letter C referring to C chord with a 6, like in a lead sheet symbol. And that would usually go above the staff rather than below.
Would it be superscript or not? Or would it just be a same?
I've seen it both ways.
I thought so, yeah.
I've seen it both ways. They actually, in Roman numeral analysis, this chord doesn't exist. This is a popular music chord symbol.
Okay.
The idea of a 6. Because when I add this A to C, E, and G, what I have is an A minor 6/5 chord. Right? Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So we're going to show you a cool little example here. Matt, first off, he's going to play an example that doesn't use any inversions, right? Your bass is going to be all root notes, right?
All root position. So I'm in F major. So 1 chord, 5 chord.
Sounds like a 6. Back to 1. And there's a 5. And 1.
Pretty lame.
It's not lame, but it's kind of predictable, maybe.
Yeah.
Some might actually say it's lame. I think it's kind of cute.
Yeah. All right, so let's try adding some inversions here though, and see if we can make this sound a little more interesting. So a lot of this is going to make for a more interesting bass line. Right?
Yeah. So let's listen to the bass line.
So
here's your 1.
First inversion 5, and then 6. That's actually root position. 1 6 4 5 1. So I managed to go in the bass, you know.
And if you were to do that walk down using the chords that were supposed to go with those bass notes, you'd have a completely different sound. But now you have a more interesting way of playing what you played earlier.
Absolutely.
Using inversions. Lovely. So these inversions, they're going to come up in your ear training. They're going to come up in your analysis. So it's good to go ahead and get an idea of them.
Yes.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed. That, and hope it was educational. And we'll have plenty more to come.
See you soon.
Notice any difference between this theme and the intro music? It's subtle, but it's there. If you find it, write us and let us know at info@musicstudent101.com.